This, ladies and gents, is Blair. And not Hassan Piker. I know I just ruined him for a lot of people, and now you can never unsee that. You're welcome. What's good, folks? It's Nightmare Frame here with a Blair build guide, or builds guide. A video with fully maxed out Blair builds was long overdue, and he recently got a buff to his range, and no, I barely noticed it.
Get out.
Yeah, okay. Also, there's a lot of people who just don't like Blair and say he sucks. I got something to say to all those people. You guys are half right. His first and second skill are his worst, but are so essential to his kit and nuke rotation. All of his damaging skills are dimension focused, so that means multi-talented is going to be insane, as it greatly reduces the cooldown of his fourth ability for a boss nuking build. And that means you want a dimension reactor for him, no matter what skill module you use, as all the damaging skills do not change alignment. Now, here's the thing, there's going to be a new Ultimate Descendant launching really soon, and the talk of the town says it's either Freyna or Blair. Yeah, I know. I'm also waiting on this particular update where we can have different socket types in different loadouts, because as of now, the builds I have could replace one mod in each build to perfect it. But we're limited to what we can do. But the builds shown here today are balanced and can be taken anywhere, and you can nuke pretty much any content. Now let's take a look at his kit so you can understand how we're going to build this guy. His passive is all about having multiple flame zones on the ground to get a damage buff and dealing more damage on enemies inflicted with burn. Casting either his first or fourth skill will spawn flame zones, basically pools of fire on the ground. Having multiple flame zones on the field will increase your skill critical hit rate. This is base skill crit, and this can scale pretty high when paired alongside your mods. And if enemies are inflicted with burn, you deal 10% more critical damage. It's not much, but it's something. Now, his first skill, Blaze Up. No, he isn't lighting a spliff, but Blair summons flame zones around himself to deal initial damage and burn damage over time, while also increasing his skill critical hit rate. The burn damage over time tick is affected by skill damage modifiers and dimension modifiers. His second skill allows him to manage his resource economy fairly easily. Extinguish. This ability is able to suck up the flame zones he himself summoned and refunds himself some mana, while also buffing his skill power modifier to further boost your burn damage over time. Burn Taste. His third skill. Blair turns his hand into a flamethrower, dealing damage to anything in its path. Yep, that's it. And finally, Deadly Cuisine, his ultimate ability. He summons a large fireball that deals explosive damage upon impact and splits into multiple fireballs, leaving flame zones on the ground, dealing damage over time. Yeah, so his skills are pretty straightforward and nothing over the top. So one of his skill modules that augments his fourth skill, Truly Deadly Cuisine. This is what you would use for skill damage on bosses or even just general gameplay for those who like to throw big bombs. This significantly increases the damage on the fourth skill, but unfortunately removes its ability to create flame zones. The other skill module, better used for a burn build, is Classic Chef. This alters his passive alongside his first and fourth skill, increasing the amount of flame zones they can create. And in doing so, it increases the amount of skill critical hit rate you can achieve, easily hitting 100% skill crit hit rate, guaranteeing every ability you do to be a crit. This also includes your burn damage over time. And finally, Backdraft. This augments the same set of skills as Classic Chef and including your second skill. Flame Zones provide you with weapon damage buffs instead of skill buffs, because now Flame Zones grant you firearm critical hit rates, and you deal increased critical damage with your guns on burning enemies. And consuming Flame Zones with your second ability will increase your firearm attack and weak point damage, turning Blair into a really decent weapon platform. And here's a nice tip for nuking bosses with his 4. Utilizing multi-talented is going to be important because of snapshotting the cooldown reduction into your fourth skill, casting your first skill to give you the crit increase, and while the multi-talented buff is active, you can follow up with your fourth. This way, you're able to release 2 nukes in quick succession. Another tip, after throwing out your 4th skill, you can consume the flame zones with your 2nd to replenish some mana, so you have some juice for another big nuke. And this is the only setup that would need multi-talented. Range is also an important stat for him, to give him better coverage on his abilities, especially his 4th ability Explosion Radius. But if you're comfortable with him, this can be interchangeable on the bossing loadout for something like additional duration, so your flame zones remain on the field longer to replenish your mana when needed. Alright, now that you understand how he works and all that, let's take a look at all the builds.
Before I get into the build section, I would like to thank one of my viewers, Raiden, who did help me understand Blair's kit even more, especially putting a lot of the strength and weaknesses into perspective. And now onto the Reactor. For the substance, number one important thing you want to have is crit damage. In gold, of course. That is one of the most important things because it multiplies the damage when you crit, and you can run anything else except skill cost because he doesn't need to worry about skill cost even if he's running a Slayer set. And Blair already provides you a lot of critical hit rate with his flame zones. So having crit rate isn't really needed. Range will give you a meter increase, so you won't see so much use to that. Duration could be nice. Skill cooldown is also nice. However, if you're doing this for bossing with his fireball, his big ball, Cuisine, then you want to have bonus damage to Colossi. Now for the ability damage boss build and your burning build, you always want to go with the Slayer set. Unfortunately, the Slayer set does not have good main stats. The auxiliary gives you defense, but you do get HP. The sensor, you're stuck with max shields and you don't really care about shields on Blair. However, you get that max MP and MP recovery. That's the most important thing you want to have on the sensor. And then of course the memory, you're still stuck with max shield as main stat, but defense is always nice, and any other resource management secondary substat. Unfortunately, I got this stupid Asive thing. And then finally the processor, main stat, max HP. That's nice, but then the rest of the substats, you can get max shields and even an elemental damage resistance. But the reason we're using the Slayer set is because of the skill power increase. That's it. The general rounds does nothing for us because we're not using a general rounds weapon. If you were to get something like an enduring legacy mounting, then you would get the benefits of the general rounds. But I'm just using Slayer set for the skill power increase. Taking a look at the Blair build, I'm going to be starting off with the 4 nuke, which is his 4th ability nuke build. Starting off with the sub module, this can be whatever you want. I'm going to go for long distance maneuvering. For the skill module, I'll be running Truly Deadly Cuisine. If you take a look at the ability, you do get that small fireball, creating flame zones, yada yada yada. However, when we save this, we're going to lose all of that flame zone stuff. We're going to be left with the burn damage over time. However, we get a massive increase to our 4th skill. Notice the skill power is at 6,934. That's massive compared to its original 407. I have 4 A's over here. For the first one, I'm going to go with Focus on Fire. This grants me fire skill power and minus cooldown. You want to have that cooldown, very important. And then these last 3 are going to be for our crits. I'm going to put skill insight for the skill critical hit rate, skill concentration for the critical hit damage, and then finally finishing it off with front lines to give me even more crit damage with some critical hit rate. Now there are people who are running 4 crit mods, but I don't really see the point of doing so. I guess it's for those who want optimal consistency. We got a C and we got a D for our survivability. That kind of rhymes. I'll be putting in my increased HP for the health, but for my defense, I won't be running a regular defense, but I'll be running Spear and Shield. This grants me defense and skill power. Skill power is really important to increase the damage on my 4th skill. I do have 3 M's, and these 3 M's are all here for cooldown reduction. Starting off with MP conversion. This reduces my mana pool, but grants me that minus 36.5% skill cooldown. Nimble Fingers for some additional skill cooldown. And then finally, multi-talented. This is what makes me nuke with my 4th skill more frequently. Looking at the skill cooldown, I do have 22.3 seconds. So if I were to cast my flame zones and get the skill critical hit rate, just like this, pay attention to the boons right next to Blair. So I'm going to move myself over here so then you can pay attention over here. Cast flame zones. You see that little countdown that we get right there, that's the 20% skill cooldown that we get. His first skill is Dimension, so when you cast it, you get that. You throw out your fireball, boom. Take a look at the cooldown reduction on the fireball. And because we have a flame zone active, we get even more. And plus, the fourth skill is also Dimension. We just threw that second one, and we got a fourth one. Why not? And if you have flame zones on the field, you can suck up those flame zones for another fireball. So as we go back to the build and take a look at our final slot, to have flame zones on the field even longer, I highly recommend running a duration mod. And the duration mod I'll be running is Maximize Duration. This will increase my duration by 40%. Now, for those wondering, oh, the skill power modifier, you don't really need this. You don't have to worry about the skill power modifier because we're only focusing on raw power with the fourth. This negative will affect the burn damage over time to 0, and that doesn't really matter. However, we get that increase in duration. But with that mod on the field, I can have my flame zones active for a longer period. So after the nuking session, I can just suck up the flame fields to give me back some mana, and I also get a skill power modifier. Even if you lose skill power modifier, you still get it back thanks to the flame zones. And now moving on to the burn build, which increases the amount of flame zones I have, and we deal a lot of burn damage, and you can see we just wiped out those level 100 enemies. Let's spawn them back in. Boom. Insta-dead. We also can throw out our fireball, and it spawns flame zones. We can suck up all those flame zones. Look at that mana regen. And because we use the Dimension skill, we get cooldown, we get our second ability back, and look at our mana. It's back to full. And if it's a mobbing scenario, enemies will drop MP, health, so you're good to go. And there's only a couple of things that have changed on the build. Looking at that build, pretty much the same. However, instead of Spear and Shield, I'm running Iron Defense for the skill power modifier. And instead of Multi-Talented, I went with Focus on Dimension to increase my skill power modifier. But this also gives me that minus 6% cooldown reduction. So we get our abilities back. So we still get some cooldown reduction on our abilities. It's not as insane as it was before with 22 seconds, but 30 seconds is still fine because you're mostly going to be going back and forth with your flame zones on the 1, using your third skill to burn everything, suck up the flame zones with the 2, replace the flame zones, and then you can throw out a fireball that spawns more flame zones. You can suck those up, rinse and repeat. It's all about applying flame zones, nuking, sucking up, flame zones, nuking, get 23% more skill power modifier thanks to his second ability. So your burn damage over time is going to go even higher. And then finally, I got my gun DPS Blair. This is a weapon platform Blair. So having flame zones on the field will increase your weapon critical hit rate. Look at that. We're at 50% from its original 27%. Pretty nice. And when you suck these up, we get an increase to my weak point damage. You saw how it just shifted there really quickly? Yes. And an increase to my firearm attack. So if we were to spawn enemies, you want to cast your flame zones over here, suck it up, and then you can resummon your flame zones. You get the buff on the side right there to give you that damage increase, while also having some crit rate increase. And if enemies are inflicted with flames, they take more damage, just like that. This is the weapon platform Blair. And to refresh that, you just suck up the flame zones again. And having duration on this is also really important. Now, this build is slightly tankier. Now, for those who are wondering, why are my stats pretty low? Because I'm level 13. And I soloed a few bosses at level 13. It's not that hard as long as you know what you're doing. The component said I focused on survivability a lot more than anything else. But I did keep a 2-piece set bonus, and that's the Annihilator set piece bonus to give me that 5.7% duration. We got max HP and max HP over here. And then finally, we got some max HP and max shield. Give us some tankiness and survivability. Taking a look at the build, I will be using Backdraft as my augment. As you can see, we got that weak point damage, firearm damage. Looking at the passive, firearm critical hit rate. And this one gives me firearm attack and weak point damage. I'll be cycling between flame zones and my second skill, so I can get all the damage I can on my weapons. For the build, not worried about having damage, but more about survivability and duration. increased HP, defense for the survivability, agony for some MP, and a little bit of defense, maximize duration for the skill duration by 40%, time distribution to reduce my cooldown, but it also gives me some HP, nimble fingers for some cooldown, steam accelerant for even more HP paired alongside this, fire sigillium, this gives me fire skill power, but it also increases my critical hit resistance. For those who don't know, bosses can crit on you. That's why sometimes an attack that won't really kill you can end up killing you. Focus on fire just for some fire skill power, because what else are we going to put here? But then again, it gives me skill cooldown. And then finally, something that will help you resist those status effects that bosses do. Now, if you're fighting gluttony, anti-freeze solution is really nice, giving that chill resistance. You don't even have to rank this up. Then you have all the other variants. They're all A sockets, so that's pretty nice. You can switch between these. So if you're going against a fire enemy like Molten Fortress, boom heat resistance, Frostwalker, to be honest, Frostwalker, you can still just use your ability nuke way better. But for those who want to use guns with Blair, this is what you would do. When that update comes around with socket type changing, I'm definitely going to go for even more duration over here to upkeep that weak point damage and firearm attack. Because right now I only have 29 seconds. But then I guess people will be like, why don't you add that bit of duration from battle stamina? That will increase the duration on the two. Survivability will be a bit more important, especially if you're running weapon platform. Anyway, folks, this has been it from those Blair builds. And for those Blair enthusiasts, hope you go out there and destroy the game with your massive balls of doom. And that has been it for me. I do hope you enjoyed and learned something from this video. And if you did, please feel free to leave a like, share, and subscribe for more First Descendant content, streams, and so much more. Do refer to the description. Thanks for watching, and as always, a peace. Bye-bye now.